Dr. Mark Kohler, thank you for accepting my invitation to be on my podcast. So today, you've been good enough in your busy schedule to join me today, and I really appreciate it. I really do. So let's start with the question I always ask. If you could tell us a little bit about your background, your area of experience, or anything that you think is kind of relevant.
Well, I'm not famous, so I'll introduce myself. I'm Mark, or Dr. Kohler, as my students call me. I work here at the University of Adelaide in the psychology department, teaching, but also research. And my research has traditionally focused on sleep, but more broadly looks at factors that affect all of us in our lives. So sleep is a big part of that, but it might be how we get on with other people, what we spend our time doing, etc., and how those factors affect our well-being and our learning in particular. So I've got an interest in cognitive outcomes as well as your typical psychosocial outcomes.
Welcome to Deep Thinking with Dr. Stephen Stolz, where academic rigour meets real life. I'm Dr. Stephen Stolz, educator, philosopher and academic at the University of Adelaide, and this podcast series is my quest to help everyday people access research-based ideas that feed curiosity and foster deep thinking. In today's episode, I explore sleep with Dr. Mark Kohler and examine some practical guidelines to improve the quality of your sleep. Whether you have sleep issues or struggle to get a good night's sleep or just generally interested in sleep, then today's discussion will provide you with both the intellectual framework and practical insights to navigate this important area of life. By the end of our time together, you'll come to a better understanding of sleep and discover some practical ways to improve your sleep. So join me as I bridge the gap between evidence-based research and everyday application. This is Deep Thinking with Dr. Stephen Stolz. Why do we sleep?
Okay. Obvious, big question. Look, in a simple way, we sleep to live. Like we sleep because we expend energy during the day. We undertake a whole range of behaviours, like we move, we reproduce, we eat, we think. And so we sleep so that we can do those things. And I think in the field of sleep research in particular, the more and more we start to look at the importance of sleep or the role of sleep in living broadly, we understand how big a part it actually plays, how critical it is for not just the bigger, surviving questions, but also for the thriving questions, for living our best life, for being able to undertake more complex behaviours than perhaps we thought sleep was important for. There's actually a lot going on while we sleep. We're just not aware of it, of course. We're not consciously aware of what's going on. We're not seeing people, jumping around and doing certain things. And so there's this sort of assumption that not much is happening, but actually a lot's going on.
As you know, I've got a Fitbit. And I do keep an eye on my sleep data because the Fitbit monitors my sleep. All sorts of technologies do that, but Fitbit watches can do that now. So maybe if you could just take me through like the different phases and what's happening and so on, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. The Fitbit technology is fantastic, and that technology has come a long way in a fairly short period of time. I think as researchers, we didn't quite trust it, but it does a pretty good job now. You could spend a lot of money on some pretty high-tech gear and it not give you a lot more than what just a simple Fitbit would do these days. The phases is fascinating because that's a good example of how sleep is not just this one sort of static state. So we go into sleep, we transition from wake to sleep, and then we essentially enter this cycle of if you like, deeper and lighter stages of sleep. And we go through that, and we continue to go through that cycle on average about every 90 minutes or so. It's going to vary from person to person. But the typical...
So it's every 90 minutes, did you say?
Yeah. So it's
really? You cycle through that in 90 minutes?
Yeah. So it's actually not a cycle that takes the whole night to get through. You go through this cycle many times.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the basic shape of it, if you like, is that you usually start off going into a deep sleep, and that's sort of the initial part of a cycle, maybe the first 30, 40 minutes thereabouts. And that's also why if you've gone to sleep and then someone wakes you up, 10, 20 minutes later, you're not feeling so happy about that. You might not be completely coherent.
Cranky pants.
Yeah. Basically, they've brought you from your deepest state of sleep, actually, through to being awake really quickly, and we don't really appreciate that at a whole range of different levels. But after we get through that deep sleep, we tend to come then into a lighter stage of sleep, and we call that the non-REM stages of sleep, and that is in contrast to the sort of final part of the cycle, which is our REM sleep. REM sleep's fascinating. That tends to be where we experience our really vivid dreams. Our brain actually looks almost awake during REM sleep if you to just look at the brain activity. But we're obviously not. We're not conscious of what we're doing. Our motor system, our muscle system is actually deactivated. And there was early experiments in animals, think of that as what you will. But the early experiments sort of showed when those pathways were tampered with, it appeared as though the animals were sort of trying to act out their dreams during REM sleep. So,
wow.
Yeah. But in a healthy sense, our muscle system's deactivated. So we're not, imagine that, acting out our dreams while we weren't conscious of it. That would be interesting, to say the least. But REM sleep is also fascinating because it seems to be a really important phase of sleep for restoring cognitive capacities, emotionality, processing memories, that sort of thing.
Right.
Whereas the earlier stages of sleep, while they're also important for some of those cognitive abilities, they're often thought of as being more important for the physical restoration of the body, cellular repair and growth and that kind of thing. So we go through this cycle roughly every 90 minutes across the whole night. What tends to happen is the earlier cycles in the night tend to have more of that really deep sleep, the physiological recovery.
Oh, right. So you pretty much, so that moment where you go from, wake to sleep, that first cycle is straight into deep.
Pretty much.
Really?
Yeah, you get there really quickly. And
wow. Okay.
how quick you go, how deep you go, how long you stay there often depends on how tired you are. The tireder you are tends to be the more of that you get in a cycle as like a recovery. And then the later stages of sleep, or the later cycles of sleep, I should say, tend to have less of that really deep physically restorative sleep and more of the lighter stages and the REM, probably because they're working on things like our cognitive processing, our emotional health and processing and that sort of thing. So you get this kind of contrast of what's going on in each of these cycles, but also probably the purpose of them are a little bit different as well and changes across the night. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so it might be a weird question to ask, but you said REM's generally associated with dreams.
Yeah.
How do you know that? Is it just you asking, participants, researchers asking participants afterwards?
Yeah. How do you know people are asleep?
Yeah, how do you know
Yeah.
that, for instance, REM is associated with dreams, for instance?
Yeah. I think the best evidence is, like you say, something as simple as we're waking people up.
Right.
I think as technology's improved, we can actually be tracking what's happening in the body, so that we can map the experience when we wake them up to precise moments, within the physiology.
Right. Okay.
And I think as that type of research has accumulated, we've become more and more confident that this is a real thing. It's happening in pretty much everyone, in most people, even though some people report, to dream very little. They probably do.
Yes.
It's just they aren't waking up at an opportune time to remember it, or just have poor memory for the dream content. So, it's a fascinating topic. There's some debate about, well, how do we really know what's going on? These are subjective reports of people who are no longer asleep. But
we all sleep, but yet it's. I'm being honest with you. We all sleep, but yet it's this massive mystery out there. That's why I was so keen to do this episode, and obviously very keen when I knew about your kind of research background to get you on board here. So thanks for joining me. I have to ask. Can I go back and ask just a few follow-up questions?
Sure.
Now, you mentioned some physiological signs associated with each cycle. Mm-hmm. What are they? Like, for instance, I'm assuming you would be looking at heart rates and other metrics.
Yeah.
Maybe tell us a bit about those.
Yeah, sure. Well, if we start with the brain, that's the primary place we look. And then, but there are other measures as well that change. And with the brain, if we look at our brain is oscillating. There's electrical activity in the brain and that's oscillating, and we can measure that usually through a technique we call electroencephalography, or EEG. Mm-hmm. And those patterns, those cycles are quite rhythmic. They're quite aligned. and across the brain, and very they're slow and they're large. So the oscillations themselves, imagine big slow waves rolling into the beach, where you float up and you float down, and this is kind of deep sleep. You see these big rolling waves kind of come through.
So they're quite flat.
No, quite high in their peaks.
Okay, so they're actually quite sharp peaks.
They're not sharp in that they're very sort of more smooth and drawn out, but they rise high and then go down deep.
I see what you mean. Yep.
As we go into a lighter stage of sleep, the height or the amplitude of those waves gets shorter.
Oh, I see now. Yep.
But it stays quite in time with each other. And then when we get to REM sleep, it looks a little bit more haphazard. We get smaller but sharper kind of activity going on. It tends to be out of phase with itself, where probably different things are happening in different areas of the brain at that particular time or any particular time.
Yes.
And that's actually quite similar to what we see in awake EEG.
Right. So, I think most people know or have heard of REM. So most people, I don't know, maybe because of movies or culture or whatever.
The band.
Yeah. I do like REM. And so I think we know about it, and we kind of tend to go, oh, I know I have to have more of it because it's good for me. Like, is that kind of true? Like, out of all the phases, I want more of REM than deep, or should I just be happy that there's a cycle that's kind of even?
Yeah, okay.
That makes sense to you?
Yeah. Look, I think you want all of it, absolutely.
Okay,
and for some of the reasons that we spoke about earlier, they tend to be, or we think more and more through the research that's coming through, that they're more important for different types of functions.
Yeah.
But I think it's also important to take note of how things are, how they play out. They probably play out like that for a reason. We get a lot of our deeper sleep first in the earlier phases of the night. It's probably more advantageous for us to focus on that, to get that restoration, that physical restoration going, feeling alert, being able to respond physically, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Fight off diseases, infections, etc. The immune system, supporting the immune system. But to live a good life, to function optimally, we also need to be able to think and behave and feel well, and so those lighter stages, the REM stages, are important for that. And having it all in balance is critical. You want to be aiming for a nice, well-rehearsed, if you like, pattern of sleep.
Yes.
Consistent pattern of sleep, if possible.
Yes.
But look, if you had to choose one, I think I'd be choosing the deep sleep over anything else.
Oh, right. Because of the restorative nature of it.
Just from a purely survival point of view.
Yeah. Okay, that's interesting. Well, it's a nice little segue into my next question, which is around sleep disorders. Like if you could name maybe one or two, or the common ones I'm talking about. Maybe insomnia. I automatically, when I think of, common sleep disorders, I automatically think insomnia. So maybe you could start in insomnia for me.
Interesting one. It's a big problem these days, insomnia.
Yes.
And probably for a few different reasons, but and insomnia itself is a bit more of an umbrella term. There are types of insomnia.
Okay.
So, you can get more genetically based sort of insomnia, or, idiopathic insomnia, but you can also get insomnia that is focused more on having trouble getting off to sleep, versus waking up too early, versus maybe, disruption during the night. So that, you can get different characteristics of insomnia. The most common not obviously, but I think what most people experience from some time in their life is this difficulty getting off to sleep.
Yeah. Yes. That would be a common one.
Yeah. You get into that cycle of, ruminating about things or getting frustrated.
Oh, tomorrow I've got to pick up the dry cleaning, or, I've got to drop my daughter off child off at 8:30, not 8 o'clock, And
that leads to the next thought, and then the next thought, and then you're watching the clock, and then you're thinking about watching the clock, and, it kind of spirals. And and while there can be a few different reasons for that, one is that we have this sort of sleep phase. So we talked about the cycles within sleep, but we also have this broad, what we call the circadian rhythm, circadian phase, which in a healthy sense means that we're most sleepy, we're best able to get to sleep at night when we think we should be sleeping. And we're more alert and less able to go to sleep during the day, during that time of the day. And that's how we want it to be. But for some people, it's not quite that clear cut, and that circadian rhythm can be shifted one way or the other. So we might have trouble going to sleep in the evening, or we wake up too early, or in some cases it can be completely flipped on its head.
Yeah. I
So,
can imagine,
yeah.
shift work,
Yeah.
like working night shift,
Yeah.
I can imagine would mess with that.
Absolutely.
Would I be right in my thinking there?
Yep, absolutely. You're going to put pressure on that circadian rhythm to shift, to move, so that it's now no longer in sync with the normal, day-night sort of cycle.
Yeah.
And, you talk to a shift worker. This is interesting. You talk to a shift worker who maybe has been doing night shifts for the last 20 or 30 years.
Yep.
And I know nurses that are similar. And if you ask them, they'll say, you know what, I don't think I function perfectly fine. I've been doing this for 20 years. And the interesting thing is, if you ever get to speak to one of those nurses when they stop doing night shift and they maybe go back onto days or they retire or whatever the situation is, and it never ceases to amaze me, or actually it doesn't amaze me at all, but I'm always fascinated to hear them say, I cannot believe how much better I feel. I've spent all those years.
Yes.
I thought I was fine. I was coping because it was normal for me, but actually it wasn't. Actually, I was actually, suffering in some way. Like I wasn't functioning as well, because clearly I'm functioning so much better now that I'm allowed to sleep at night and be awake during
I always
the
talk
day.
about the zombie characteristics. You become like a zombie.
Yeah.
You're functioning, but you're not really
Yeah.
kind of functioning. I know during my uni days when I actually did a few shifts, like during the night.
Yep.
I don't know. I don't remember working you see, this is the thing. I don't remember working that shift.
Yeah, how scary.
I did it.
Yeah.
But I don't remember working that shift.
Yep.
And I'm like going,
Yep.
did I work
Yeah.
kind of thing? And it was like this zombie moment.
Yeah, I did. My uni, I think maybe it's a uni days thing. I used to
think
do
it's
12-hour
university,
night shifts at the
yes.
hospital, and just that zombie phase at the end of the shift in the morning, getting on the wrong train, missing my stop, whatever it might be,
Yeah.
putting the butter in the cupboard and the Vegemite in the fridge, and whatever.
All right, now the $69,000 question is, what can I do about it? Like, so if I'm experiencing some version or variety or different type of insomnia, what are some practical advice you can offer?
Okay, yeah. So let's talk just a tiny bit more about insomnia then,
Sure,
so
let's
I
do
can
that.
get into the what we can do about it, because we switch pretty quick to other things, I think. So let's take the classic case of insomnia, having trouble getting off to sleep. That's, predominantly that's what people will come to you to talk about if they're having difficulty sleeping. And there could be some sort of shift in their circadian rhythm. The issue is that it never shifts completely. So, take the shift worker, for example.
Yes.
They think they're doing okay, doing 20 years of night shift, but their body actually isn't going to let them sleep as well during the day ever as it will during the night, because we're just not wired that way. And no matter that there's a little bit of a shift, the circadian rhythm is never going to shift completely. Now, in insomnia, our circadian rhythm can shift enough to make it really hard for us to go to sleep at an optimal time, so that we can get enough sleep to wake up to get to work the next day or do whatever it is and function well the next day. And this becomes really quite frustrating for the insomniac. They get anxious about going to sleep even. They're probably anxious about other things, and that's why they've ended up in this state to begin with.
Yeah.
But now they're anxious about sleep as well. And what they're doing is they're forming bad associations with something that should be actually really good for us and we should look forward to, and that is going to sleep.
Yeah.
So now not only are they having difficulty going to sleep, but they're now worried about and associating sleep with a bad time, and that's exacerbating the whole issue. So in a perhaps a more extreme case, if you go and see a sleep psychologist or a doctor or something, they'll try and break those bad associations, those unhelpful associations. And that could just be through, adopting different behaviours, habits, encouraging us to think about things in a different way, control our anxiety. In a more extreme case, you might like this one, they would take a patient into a clinic and they would get them to go to sleep. It might take a while because they've got insomnia, but they'll get them to go to sleep. Within a few minutes of them getting into a deep sleep, they wake them up and they get them up on their feet.
Wow. Sounds like torture.
Yeah. So then they let them go back to sleep again. They go to sleep, get into a deep sleep. A couple of minutes later, they wake them up, get them on their feet again.
Wow. This is like CIA interrogation tactics.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's where it came from. I don't know. I don't think so. But what they're actually trying to do is break an association between, their thoughts about sleep and going off to sleep, so that. Well, maybe there is some torture involved in here, because the next bit is the key bit, and that is that they end up being so exhausted that when their head hits the pillow, they just go to sleep.
They're going to sleep.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so they've broken all of that cycle of ruminating about things, getting anxious about going off to sleep, taking a long time to go to sleep, and then eventually going to sleep. They get woken up. Eventually, they're so exhausted that when their head hits the pillow, they're off to sleep. And so that's a more extreme case of breaking that association. And that
would
person,
be like more chronic, severe cases, yes.
And cases that are being resistant to all of those other nicer approaches.
But surely we're not talking just one night in the sleep lab. We're talking, surely that would take days, weeks, months to break that?
No, certainly not that long.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
It's relatively quick, but it's going to vary by the individual as well.
Yeah.
How severe things are and what's going on in their life. What are the reasons for the insomnia? And, not obviously, but any of these conditions, if you've got a sleep problem, I would always say go to a GP first, because there could be underlying medical or physiological issues that aren't necessarily a core sleep problem. Well, they could be, but they could be a medical sleep problem.
It could be sleep apnea.
Yeah, sleep apnea. Yep, good example. But there might be other things that are just impinging on sleep, and it's important that the doctor can rule those in or out first before you move on to more behavioural or cognitive treatments for sleep.
I always think of a colleague who I know from America. I'll just call him Larry, and he had chronic insomnia. Like, he had tried everything for years, just for years. And I remember one day we were just kind of, we're out for lunch or whatever, and I don't know what we were talking about, and I got curious about his insomnia and what he's done. So I just, was curious about what he'd done. And I remember, he listed them all off. And then I remember he was telling me the story about how he had a younger brother, I think it was around the age of 10, 11 or 12, who passed away, like swimming. They were just swimming, and he drowned to death.
Yeah, tragic.
And it just stuck in my head that, hang on, maybe that might be the root kind of cause of what's going on. And and that there was, I think he had a sense of guilt associated with his younger brother, who he was swimming with at the time, who drowned. I remember him telling, I felt like I should have saved him. And I just felt to myself, well, it sounds like you actually need therapy. But I don't know, am I completely off the mark here and thinking?
No, I mean, we're getting into, more clinical psychology.
Yeah.
But these things can affect our sleep. A traumatic event.
Yes.
Something that we revisit, can't quite shake. Maybe over time that memory gets a little bit distorted, or we kind of, repress detail in a way. So it changes what it is that we're thinking about. But underlying all of that is this unresolved, trauma or stress or guilt, as you were saying.
Well, PTSD, as I'm sure you know, one of the symptoms is nightmares or night terrors.
Very similar, isn't it?
Yeah, and so I'm not surprised. Maybe because I'm associating my knowledge and understanding of like trauma with, how that can have a disturbance, sleep disturbances. Yeah, so I don't know, maybe. I don't know. I don't know. It just came to my mind thinking about, I agree. You need to rule out, some of the medical. You need to definitely got to rule out in or out whether there are kind of medical things going on in the background.
And sleep apnea is a perfect example of that. It's a respiratory issue, and it's affecting your sleep because the airway is collapsing. It's not going to work. You getting off to sleep and someone standing you on your feet every few minutes. Obviously, you need to go and get treatment for. You need to get it assessed properly, so that it can be, verified what's actually going on, and then, the appropriate treatment.
Yes, it makes sense. Yeah. Now, I asked about common sleep disturbances. So where does insomnia rank out of the common sleep disorders?
Insomnia is an absolute number one. One, there's probably a lot of insomnia out there.
Yes.
Diagnosed, undiagnosed.
Yes.
But secondly, little things that affect our sleep affect our life, affect us during the day.
Stress.
So even if it's not insomnia, it just shows how important sleep is because, we lose a little bit because it's a hot night. We get quite a few of them here in Adelaide. And all of a sudden, it's like, oh my goodness, I feel so grumpy. I feel so lethargic. I'm not thinking
you do
clear.
get a cranky bugger, don't you, if you haven't had a good night's sleep?
Yeah. You just it's an interesting place to be after a few nights of
Yes.
warm weather. That's for sure.
Definitely, for sure. Well, I know I'm going to do an episode on stress because I was just thinking about our modern world that we live in. It's just, demanding, time pressures, whether you are connected with digital technology, and let's face it, most professionals and most people are today, it's just like another additional kind of stressor. And I was just thinking about stresses. So maybe I might ask you is our everyday general stress from just living in this modern world. I don't know how much of that is contributing to our poor sleep, or is it just too difficult to determine?
We know that stress contributes to poor sleep. It would be completely unsurprising to find that these additional things in our lives, these additional stresses, the constant need to be up to date online, the constant connection, that inability to sort of switch off, remove ourselves, find ourselves away somewhere, aren't also contributing to more and more sleep disturbance and sleep problems. Yeah, the stress of the modern life. And I think, even the advent of the light bulb probably was something we might not even think about now as revolutionary in terms of technology and the effect that it has on sleep. But I think, it kind of started there. All of a sudden, we could be up during the night and be doing things.
When we normally in the past would have been sleeping.
Exactly. Yeah,
that makes sense.
We can work through the night. It changes. We have shift work. It changes the routine, people's routines. And
intuitively, that just makes sense.
Yeah. There's only so many hours in a day. If you're going to be doing something else with it, then something currently has to give.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, today, that's sleep.
Yeah. That's the one that kind of takes the biggest hit, isn't it? And of course, long term, it has the biggest impact on health and well-being. And we talked about, we were having a bit of a joke before about, having cranky pants, but it really does have an impact on your health and well-being. So
absolutely. I mean, and not just the quality of your life, but even mortality, disease, cardiovascular health, those sorts of things. They've all been linked to chronic, short sleep and sleep disturbance. Yeah.
All right, so let's recap. So we've got insomnia number one. It's a firm one, right? Firm number one. So what would you put second and third? So maybe let's just go, what would you have in second place?
You should have warned me about this before. I've got my rankings right. But
it doesn't have to be kind of accurate here, but what would you probably put it to then? How's that?
It probably depends a little bit on your age.
Sure.
So in adults, I think sleep apnea is a big one. It does affect a lot of people, and that can range from a sort of more severe sleep apnea that requires, a bit more intervention, whether it be surgery or a device to help people breathe.
Like a CPAP machine.
CPAP, yep. Or it can be more mild, like a frequent chronic snorer, or that's a form of obstruction. That's a form of, if you like, it's not sleep apnea, but it's on the same spectrum, and it's still having an effect on your sleep and on your well-being. So I think if you take all of that as a spectrum, that would definitely have to be up there in the top few.
I won't hold you to the numbers, but what you would put there?
Yeah.
Okay, so insomnia 1, 2, we'll put like kind of physiological, anatomical type sleep disturbances like sleep apnea, and we'll put it on the range there. And what would you have as probably number 3?
Oh, number 3, I don't know that this is interesting as to whether you call this a sleep disorder or not, but there are things that happen to us or to some of us during the night, like sleepwalking, sleep talking.
I had a question about that, yes.
Grinding our teeth.
Grinding our teeth, yes.
People rocking in the night.
Yes. I'm going to follow up on all these questions in a minute, but keep going.
Some of these are considered their own category, if you like, but I think you can sort of bundle them all together. Things that go, I don't know, bang in the night. There's kind of physical behaviours or activities that happen, and it extends through to more bizarre things like eating during our sleep or having sex during our sleep, sexomnia.
I saw a case there was a case in the media just recently about that. Yeah. So I saw that.
It has. So there are all the legal repercussions.
Yes.
I've been in represented cases where it's the defence is sleepwalking or things like this.
I've got to ask straight up. What is sleepwalking, and like what is going on? And then Why does it happen to some of us and others it doesn't happen at all? What is going on there?
Yeah, it's interesting, hey? It's fascinating.
It's very fascinating.
I don't know that we know the answer to, who gets it and who doesn't, but it does affect a lot of people. And it seems to be, the more we understand it, it seems to be that, when we are asleep, the whole brain isn't asleep. It isn't switched off. There are parts of our brain that definitely are, like our motor system, as we spoke about before. But we sort of have these kind of a micro level of activity that's going on. And sometimes that doesn't all work, well, let's just say correctly or well.
Okay.
And so we can still be unconscious. We've got, sort of, if you like, our prefrontal, our frontal, our cortical areas of the brain that, they're offline. But our motor system, or parts of our motor system, switch on.
Wow.
And so we're asleep, but we get up and there's enough of our perceptual system working that we can navigate or operate a familiar environment.
Wow.
And
So I was joking before about zombies, but is that similar to a kind of like a zombie type state?
That's probably more of a philosophical question, but you're probably not far off. It's probably one of the closest things we have.
Yeah, at least we know about it depicted through Hollywood movies and stuff. But because is it somehow unique to certain populations, like young people, middle age? Because when I was a kid, and I didn't know this, my parents only told me this the other day. I don't even know how it came up. They said, when you were young, you used to sleepwalk. Apparently, I used to walk into their bedroom and I would talk to them, have a conversation with them, and then I would kind of go back to sleep. So is it just unique to kids or adults?
No, it happens with adults too.
Wow, adults.
I think it's more just noticeable in kids because, they're being parented usually.
Of course.
I can remember my brother climbing out. He sleepwalked. And
really?
Climbing out the window.
Climbing out the window?
Yep, walking around to the front of the house and then waking up and knocking on the front door. Mum and Dad opening the door and there he is, in the middle of the night.
There.
So
in his boxes or something like that?
Yeah, he was a chronic sleepwalker.
Wow.
So, you do get that and you notice it more, obviously, if your kids are up and about. And,
yes, of course.
You're watching for that.
Kind of scary a little bit. What happens if, I wouldn't know, there are cases like someone's got in a car and tried to drive it or anything like that? Or?
Yeah, so driving, there are people that have fallen off things and actually died during a sleepwalking episode.
Wow.
And then that's when we start to get into some of the legalities, like, well, were you actually asleep while you were driving? Were you actually asleep while you walked and did
So
X
how
and
would
Y?
they if I'm in a court of law, how would they determine that though?
Yeah, hard. I think there's always going to be some exclusions, so if you'd been drinking or there are other sort of conditions.
Medications.
Medications is a big one. If those things are in place, then, sleepwalking should be excluded as a reason for what's happened. But if you have a history of sleepwalking and there's every possibility or chance that occurred and none of the exclusions were there, it's a reasonable thing for perhaps a court to consider.
Yeah, so they would take it into consideration if there was evidence to support the claim that was being made oh, wow. Yeah. I've got to ask you, if someone's sleepwalking, should you wake them up?
The issue, though, is that you can imagine that you're asleep and you don't know that, the last thing you can remember is that you went to bed in your own bed.
That's right.
And all of a sudden you've woken up now in the lounge room or somewhere else. It's probably, and you're going to be woken up from a stage of sleep where you're not completely coherent, could be a bit confused, could be quite unsettling for a young child, for example. So I think the general advice is don't, but maybe try and keep them safe and usher them back to bed. Often what I find with sleepwalkers is that you can sort of interact with them in a small way that isn't kind of alerting them too much, completely waking them up.
Yeah, okay.
But there's a level of information that's getting through and you can kind of, maybe walk them back to bed.
All right, back to bed, Stephen.
Yeah.
I think that's what my parents said because I think I said to them, I said, if I was up, sleepwalking, what did you do? I think I actually said, and they said, no, we just said, Stephen, back to bed now, off you go. And I think I just went back to bed.
I think it's a subconscious level. You're used to your parent telling you, back to bed.
Back to bed.
That message just gets through and away you go.
So it's not unique to young, you're a child or a teenager or an adult. It can just happen to any of us.
Yeah. Some of those behaviours are more, related to certain ages. So, you get something that is often quite terrifying for a young parent is they sleep terrors, Child's been asleep for maybe an hour.
Nightmares.
And they just scream, and you can't sort of communicate with them. You can't really calm them down very easily. And, they've woken up from that deep stage of sleep in a very confused state. And, it's quite terrifying for them.
Yes.
It's not a nightmare. That's a bad dream in a nutshell.
Oh, okay. So what's the difference? That's a good question. So thanks for saying that. So what's the difference between, like, say, a nightmare and a night terror or any other kind of category here?
Yep. Well, so a night terror is, like we've been saying, you wake up fairly early into your sleep.
Okay.
An hour or so.
Yes.
What's happened is you've woken up from deep non-REM sleep. Mm-hmm. You're very confused and a bit incoherent. Not really aware of what's going on. It's quite frightening. And in a child, they do tend to sort of scream or call out, be upset. A nightmare is something that we all experience. So adults don't tend to experience night terrors so much.
Okay.
They tend to grow out of them. Whereas nightmares are something that we all experience, and they're essentially a dream that is, very frightening, very disturbing, and we tend to have that during REM sleep. And so, because REM sleep is also a sort of a lighter stage of sleep, we'll often wake out of it and remember, and particularly a kid, but even sometimes an adult, you wake out of a nightmare and you're not sure for a moment, is this real? Like, is the bad guy still there, or is this terrible thing still happening? And it takes a little while to calm down. But, it's unpleasant. And again, it feeds into those negative associations with sleep. Oh, that was terrible. I don't want to go to sleep and have another bad dream like that. Or now they're so, aroused and alert.
Negative association with the sleep that happens with the nightmares. So it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? You over time, you build up that really negative association.
Difficulty sleeping and, perhaps more nightmares.
Wow, that's tough. Yeah. So tell us a bit about teeth grinding. Am I right in thinking that's just stress, or what's kind of going on here with the kind of teeth grinding?
Sure. Stress is a big part of it.
Okay.
We often find stress as a contributing factor to people who are grinding their teeth or have what we call bruxism. But it also happens in people who, stress isn't really a major implication. Or not
still do it.
Yeah. So there are cases where they do tend to grind their teeth a bit, and that's an issue. And, they need to obviously wear a mouth guard or something like that because of the impact on their teeth and on their jaw too. A lot of people get a lot of jaw pain and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But often stress is a big cause. I knew a young man once, and he came to me because of sleep problems, and he did a lot of gaming in the evening and that sort of thing.
Okay.
So I kind of got a little bit distracted by that and was trying to work with him in terms of what we call sleep hygiene, just fixing up his sleep routine and sleep habits a bit and that kind of thing. And it had a little bit of effect, but it never really solved the problem. Anyway, he left the city, and a couple of years later just happened to be visiting again, and I happened to bump into him.
Yes.
And he said, the sleep problems I had, it ended up being that I was grinding my teeth.
Oh, right.
And I'm like, first I felt like an idiot because, of course, that was something I should have checked. But it was sort of masked by all of these other behaviours that he was experiencing and or engaging in, and that weren't very conducive for sleep.
Yes.
So that teeth grinding wasn't something that was so much stress related. It was just something that he did. Whether it was genetic, I don't know. But it really impacted the quality of his sleep during the night.
Wow.
Yeah.
We've mentioned teeth grinding. Mm-hmm. What was that other one you mentioned before? They were the main ones.
Rocking around during the night, I think.
Yes, moving around, like so physically.
REM movement disorder is one of those.
Okay.
So,
yes.
So again, something that happens during REM, which is a bit unusual because during REM usually we don't get physical movement because of that deactivation of the muscle system we spoke about, which is probably a good thing. So we're not acting out our dreams. But you do get cases where during REM sleep, the individual, and does tend to be more children in this case, will kind of almost violently rock from side to side.
Wow.
And it sort of seems to be maybe some sort of self-soothing type thing, but very unusual that it occurs during REM.
Okay.
And look, we don't actually know a lot about it other than we seem to be able to break it, again, by breaking that association. So you've got a child rocking violently during the night. They're clearly asleep. This is unhealthy for them because it's waking people up, disturbing their sleep as well.
Yes.
The trick is just to wake them up out of it. And again, you're just breaking that association between the pattern of what's going on physiologically in the child,
Yes.
and the behaviour. And it's
Wow.
a pretty easy trick actually. It just seems to solve the problem.
Yeah.
90% of the time.
Wow.
But it can be quite. I mean, you can get kids like literally throwing themselves into the wall or the side of the cot or whatever.
Really?
Yeah.
It's that violent?
Yeah. So there's also the risk of injury in some cases.
Wow. All right, now I've got this one. This question's for me. I remember I was talking to someone about this the other day. I can't even remember what it was. I think it was just over Christmas time, and and it was about, they were talking about, like this more, but they were claiming they were a morning person. And so the logical question I have for you now, is there such thing as a morning or night person?
The owls versus the larks. Yeah, it's an interesting one. And you're right. I think there is a sense of one is better than the other, depending on what your social group is or what activities you're involved with. As academics, we kind of like to think that we're a morning person, up early. There's a sort of a connotation of that's the sort of smarter category, if you like, and the party animals are the larks. They can go all night on the dance floor.
Like Producer Luke for this podcast.
Yeah.
He's a night owl, I reckon. He likes to party into the night.
Yeah. When you look at it from a more sort of scientific perspective, you do get people who are sort of more extreme morning and more extreme evening, but they're actually quite rare.
Okay.
Most of us are somewhere in the middle.
Right.
And so I think most of the self-labeling or the thoughts about I'm a morning or an evening person are actually more behaviourally related.
Okay.
To do with your lifestyle and things that have happened over time, and whether you're getting enough sleep or rely too much on the coffee in the morning or whatever it might be. I actually think these are probably bigger factors in determining what you think about your morningness or eveningness, because we know that when studied, in a more controlled way, that most people are kind of somewhere in the middle.
Okay.
There's not a lot of extreme people out there, but there are those people.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So it's interesting you mentioned some of those kind of socio-cultural kind of factors, so I can imagine, I think in my uni days, so I'd say I probably would have been a night owl because that's when live gigs were on, or that's when we're at the pub or whatever, and then I would say I was probably getting the same amount of sleep, but you just shifts it,
yeah.
Yeah, you just shift it a bit, so...
Yep, you learn to be able to study at a different time of the day.
That's right.
You get through the night, the gig or whatever. There are different times of our life, and being early in your undergraduate training for the most part, kids, or shouldn't call them kids, should I? Young adults.
Oh, you can call them whatever you like.
Young adults who have come through from high school straight into university. They've just come through, or they're still going through a phase of their life where this whole circadian phase biologically actually is shifted. So, there's always this tension amongst parents of teenagers where, they're wanting their child to go to bed by a certain time because they've got to get up for school by a certain time, and the child doesn't want to because they find it hard to go to sleep, or they might resist in other ways. But there's actually a biological cause for it.
Is that right?
Yeah,
okay.
there's a pressure on our circadian rhythm during our teen years that pushes it later, so that we still need the same amount of sleep, but we tend to be able to get it or not easily get off to sleep until a bit later into the evening.
Okay.
Now, interestingly, it reverses again later when we're in adults. So it kind of corrects itself.
Okay, that's interesting.
But this kind of advancement of the circadian phase kind of kicks in during teenage years. I think it can probably, propelled a little bit by behaviour, tends to kind of carry through into the kind of early university days.
Yeah, early adult.
Yeah, before we sort of get to that time where it sort of corrects itself.
Okay, that's interesting. Because I found it interesting that sometimes my kids find it difficult to get up, teenage kids now. And I just thought because they were going to bed too late. So what's going on there?
Well, it might be that if they're getting up to go to school.
Correct, yeah. I'm just talking about normal school time.
So it could be that because there's this pressure on their circadian phase, they may be going to bed a bit later, but they may also be taking a bit longer to go to sleep.
Oh, okay.
And so they're not quite getting enough sleep, so that by the time they've got to get up to get ready for school, they're a little underslept. They're a bit tired.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and the difficulty is if there's not a lot of routine around their sleep, you get to the weekend and they're sort of left to free run a bit. Oh, they're really tired. Let's let them catch up. What that means is that they'll tend to go to bed even later and sleep in even later. and then they do it maybe even later again on the Saturday.
Okay.
So you get to Sunday and all of a sudden it's like, oh, you've got to go to bed because you've got to get up for school tomorrow. But now...
Everything's shifted.
Yeah, everything's shifted even that little bit more. So now it's even harder for them to get to sleep.
Yes.
But they've got to get up early Monday morning.
Yeah, I see.
And so you get this this peak of parent and teenager tension that occurs Monday morning, getting off to school.
Yes.
Actually, biology is a big part to blame.
Okay. You said something about catching up sleep. Is that even possible? Like, can I catch up on sleep?
Well, we do see sleep rebound. Like if you've given the opportunity to sleep longer after a period of time where you've had less sleep or not enough sleep, we see that you'll not only sleep longer but sleep deeper. So that deep sleep at the beginning of the night tends to be favoured in the first night or two after you've been without enough sleep for a period of time. So there is a sense that our body can sort of catch up. I don't think it catches up completely. Like if you go off a whole night without sleep, you're not going to get 2 nights in a row worth of sleep the next night.
Yeah.
But your body will probably work to recoup as best it can.
Yeah, okay. See, that's interesting. And intuitively, it kind of makes sense as well too, because if you go if you burn the midnight oil a little bit and like 2 or 3 days straight, generally, that 4th or 5th day, you generally have a nice little sleep the 4th or 5th day into your late nights. Well, that's what I found anyway.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, next question I have for you. Now, you've mentioned nightmares, and we've looked at that a little bit, but why do we have them? Like, is there a particular explanation for why we have them, or is it...
Oh, look, disclaimer is I'm not an expert on nightmares, but dreams generally we think are our brain making associations between all the information that it's stored. So while we're sleeping, the brain's trying to make sense of information that we've taken in during the day and across our lifespan. And often that kind of is exemplified in some often very strange and bizarre ways in our dreams. And I think a nightmare is sometimes when some of those memories get constructed in ways that become, that sort of tap into sort of a fear system or a traumatic experience, and those experiences then get associated with other memories in our head, and we get these really weird, vivid, bizarre type, nightmare occurring. So while what's playing out in a way makes sense, it's not directly related necessarily to any experience that we've had, because it's kind of a combination of various elements put together in weird ways. You could think of it as like AI. An AI tool scrapes the internet and constructs something based on a predictive code. And I think, so I'm using a computer analogy now, but I think it's actually not a bad analogy for understanding dreams and including nightmares, where we're scraping, we've taken in a piece of information, our brain's now scraping the internet of our minds for other related or things that it thinks are related in a predictive kind of way to piece together to make sense of this.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and I think sometimes what happens is it just taps into something that is, very scary, very traumatic, very disturbing, and it kind of runs away with that and it ends up being a nightmare. Yeah. And it's not unsurprising that nightmares are also associated with things like stress and bad experiences.
And trauma, we talked about before.
And trauma as well,
Yeah, definitely. No, that kind of makes sense, and it's one of those kind of, I can't say it's a mystery, but it's again one of those things that we all experience, right? We all experience sleep.
Yep.
But nightmares are just another one of those kind of parts of sleep.
We've probably all had one, or nearly all of us have had one.
Yeah, so, definitely. Yeah. Okay, so we talked a little bit about particularly younger kids moving around violently and so on. But I mean, do we move around much in our sleep?
It's an individual thing.
Yeah, okay.
I move around a lot when I'm going off to sleep. I find it a bit hard to get comfortable. But apparently, once I'm asleep, that's where I stay. Okay. Like, I just basically lay there the whole night.
Sure.
My wife, she goes to sleep, like, very, very easily. But, oh, my goodness, just rocks the whole night. Yeah, right. Changes position all night long.
Right, wow.
So, and I think that's a very good example of the population at large.
Okay.
Just very unique and individual amounts of movement that go on.
What can I do to help me fall asleep?
Routine's important. Not that you have to be, so strict that there's no flexibility. But what a routine does is it signals to the body that it's time to go to sleep, and the body starts to prepare itself, starts to, if you like, shut down. We know that it doesn't completely shut down. There's a lot of stuff happening while we sleep. We've talked about that. But it's preparing itself to transition to sleep. When you think about sleep, it's such a remarkable thing that we are completely conscious, awake, we're moving, and then we transition, we flick a switch, and we're the complete opposite. We're unconscious, we're not moving. That's remarkable that we do that, and we do it every day pretty much.
And is that normally, so when I go to sleep, does that normally happen, that transition, that flicking that switch that you referred to? Are we talking 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes? Like, when does that normally happen?
Sure. I mean, the flick of the switch is fairly instant. But the lead up to it, so if you're going to bed and then not being able to get to sleep after, 15, 20 minutes or so, then, okay, you're starting to get into the realm of that's a little bit long.
Okay,
on average.
Okay,
on average.
I see. Yeah, I see.
Again, there's variability between people, so I wouldn't. If you take 25 or 32 minutes to go to sleep, that's fine. Don't worry about it. So if you're getting to sleep and you're getting a good amount of sleep, that's fine. Okay. But on average, people don't take very long. 15 minutes or so.
No, that's good. Thank you for putting a duration on that, because I think that's important to kind of get a general guideline or guidance, or like a rule of thumb around. Around what's the average kind of time to
I think it's
kind
just,
of that transition switch moment.
Yeah. I think it's just really helpful when it comes to sleep to know, because a lot of information gets put out about how much sleep should I get, how long should it take me to go to sleep, this kind of thing. And just knowing, though, that there is quite a bit of variability between people, and so don't get too stuck on the absolute number. Just what's, in a way, what works for you. So routine, things that are not too alerting, and that could be physiologically. So, like last night, I hadn't been able to get to the gym for a while. I've been trying to do some gym work, mainly to deal with my back, which is bad because of the work that I do, sitting in an office every day.
Good for you. Yeah, that's right. I know all about that.
Yeah. And I just, for whatever reason, I hadn't been able to get to the gym, and I'm like, I've just got to go to the gym. It was like 8:30, 9 o'clock or something. So I wandered down to the gym, came back and thought, this is great. I'm just going to go to bed. I'm pretty tired, had a quick shower, into bed. But, my physiologically, I'm still, if you like, aroused. My muscles are warm. They're still kind of pumping. It took me ages to go to sleep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, so physical activity, mental activity, watching things that are highly stimulating, physical environment that's highly stimulating. So, bright lights. They talk about the blue light in a screen or a device disrupting our, interacting with our circadian rhythm and pushing it later. And there's some truth in that because it's, it's stimulating the environment. In kids, we sort of aim for, reading a book, having a bath, getting the pajamas on, and being consistent with that routine helps, because it's signaling to the body, it's making those associations that are preparing them.
So it's the consistency of some of those habitual things that really matter.
That's right.
Yeah.
Now, more practically, I suppose, if you're particularly a shift worker or just in general, making sure that your room is dark, if you've got a bright street light outside, get some decent blinds.
Yes.
Or if there are other lights on, or you're having to try and sleep during the day, something that blocks out that light, something that blocks out the noise. If you're in a noisy environment, you can't control that. Even some things like a bit of white noise, a fan going in the background. You could even get white noise apps on your phone.
Yes.
Just playing them softly just helps dull sudden and loud sounds that might otherwise, alert you or wake you up.
Yeah.
So that's another thing. Temperature's important. I mean, we're at the back end of summer now in a very hot place in the world.
Yes.
Everyone knows what a hot night can do to your sleep here. And so getting that temperature right, it does vary a little bit from person to person, but, they say kind of like the high teens, low 20s is
ideal. Yeah, because that's what I always find too. Whenever the kind of outside ambient temperatures around 18, 20, I find that I have the best sleeps.
Yeah. Seems to be the ideal kind of range.
Yeah. And is it true that in your bedroom though, you really have to drop your core body temperature by about a 1.5, 2 degrees kind of thing.
This is a fascinating thing.
Am I too kind of getting too scientific geeky here? Or?
No, I like it. I don't think we understand enough of this, but we know that with insomniacs, for example, with other people who struggle going to sleep, like people with eczema often have trouble going to sleep.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, well, eczema, why? I guess they're itchy or what is it? Well, a lot of it seems to be the temperature of the skin.
Really? Okay.
And they're not being able to release the heat to drop their temperature and allow the body to transition off
That's
to
interesting.
sleep. Yeah. So when we track the body temperature of insomniacs, the ones that are really struggling to go to sleep, we see that they're retaining this heat in their body. They're not actually releasing it.
Okay.
And really quite fascinating.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
So how many hours of sleep should we get and why?
I mean, there's subtle differences around gender and that sort of thing, or sex, but they're not the main issues when it comes to amount of sleep.
Because everyone keeps on saying it should be, on average, around 7 hours.
Yeah. You often hear 7 or 8.
Correct.
Some people will then say, oh, I need 10, and then you get people like
10?
Yeah. Some people are just like, no, I can't function unless I have 10 hours a night.
Whoa.
And then you get people like the ex-British Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher.
Margaret Thatcher, 4 hours, I think she worked on.
I don't think she actually said sleep is for wimps, but she's credited with saying it. But purportedly, she slept 4 hours a night,
But I reckon she had naps, though.
Yeah.
Which is my next question in a minute. I want to talk to you about naps.
On average for the adult, studies have shown that if you're getting less than 5 hours a night, you can't function optimally from a cognitive point of view. That's on average. And so it's actually still within the realms of possibilities that they're going to be the outlier, but there are people that exist out there who can function perfectly well. 4 hours, and by the same token, people that need, your 10, 11, 12 hours.
Wow.
But for most of us, you're right, for most of us, it is around that kind of 7, 8, 9 hours of sleep a night. But I really want to kind of make the point.
Sure do. Go ahead.
It is an individual thing. So people get so hung up on, I didn't get 8 hours of sleep last night. I haven't been able to get 8 hours of sleep for the last 6 months, and all of a sudden it's affecting their ability to go to sleep. It's like, well, maybe you don't need 8 hours of sleep a night. Maybe what's optimal for you is 7.2, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Where it becomes a bit of an issue, though, is older people.
Yes.
The elderly. So the elderly tend to report a lot of sleep problems, not being able to get enough sleep anymore or sleeping a lot less. And we do see that there's a decline in typically the total amount of sleep that an older person will get. And they attribute their feelings of feeling sleepy and tired to this reduction in total sleep time. Okay. Now, the sorry story is that there is a natural change in sleep patterns. So you just don't get as much sleep. You don't seem to hold that sleep integrity over the night of sleep like you used to. Right. You might supplement that with naps during the day.
Oh, okay.
But the tiredness doesn't really seem to be associated with the amount of sleep. Unfortunately, it's a reality we all have to come to.
Something we've both got to look forward to, right?
Something that we're probably already experiencing to a degree is that you're just getting older.
Yeah. Oh, jeez. Yeah. Well, I'm just happy to get 6. If I can get 6 hours, I'm just like happy.
Yep.
A happy day kind of thing.
I'm a bit the same. Yeah.
The next question that extends on that is like, what are the pros and cons of naps? I mean, producer Luke, the truckie from Petrie, he loves a nap. He's always talking about, I got to do this nap before I go out or do this or that. He swears by them. He swears by a nap. So what are some of the pros and cons of naps?
Well, I think there's some pretty good evidence that a short nap is actually really good for, helping us feel a little bit invigorated and,
So define short.
I'm talking less than half an hour.
Okay.
And even a nap of 10 minutes has been shown to be effective. The problem is when naps go longer than that, we allow our body to get into deep sleep. And two things happen. The first is that we're going to wake up from that nap from deep sleep and so feel a bit ordinary.
Yes.
So it doesn't have that immediate effect that we were hoping for. The second thing is that it actually wears off our need for recovery sleep. So, we get to the night and we are getting this deep sleep early in the night, and that's important for our recovery because of the debt that we've built up basically during the day and the need for that sleep. If we have a too long a nap, we wear off some of that need and it makes it harder for us to get to sleep or to have a decent sleep at night. So the balance is really important. The timing's also important.
Okay.
So you don't want to have a nap too late in the day when you're so close to being able to go to sleep.
So when you normally would go to sleep,
One, it just, well, for the same reasons, really. It's just wearing off some of that sleep debt close to when you then want to be able to go to sleep. Plus, later in the day, you have more sleep debt. So it's just, you sort of exacerbated the issue by the fact that you're having a nap late in the day.
Yeah, so recap, you probably wouldn't want to do anything longer than 30 minutes. I've got that about
30 minutes is a good amount.
Yeah, and the time you do it, you'll want to do it as far away as your normal sleep time.
Yeah. Like middle of the day, early morning, mid-morning, even early afternoons, often a good time. We get this little bit of a lull after lunch. It's a real thing.
Yes.
Like we can actually, it's not just lunch related or not just age related, not culturally related. I think some cultures have just been smart and they've acknowledged, this is a bit of a lull. Let's just close shop and all have a bit of a nap.
I could have a siesta now, actually, thinking about it. I think some cultures like Spain, who have the siesta, in parts of Latin America, I just go, they've got it right. I think they really have it right.
Some people just can't sleep during the day. I never could. And then other people just can nap anytime. They're just really, really good at it. And
just shut the eyes and off you go.
And some of it's learnt, like a truckie who has to, do long haul, sleep at, travel at different times of the, of the clock. They've got to get used to being able to jump in that cab and have a nap. Otherwise, they're not going to see it through.
True. Good point.
So I think some of it is a sort of a learnt behaviour as well.
Well, I think speaking of producer Luke, who was a truckie, he they have very strict rules around, how many hours they can drive, and then they have to have a break, and they kind of teach themselves to have naps and stuff like that. So it's interesting because because Australia, you have to drive massive distance, as you know. A lot of people fall asleep. That's why a lot of accidents happen.
Becomes a real
but
issue.
And so they always say every 2 to 3 hours, have a break. Obviously, depending how far you're going. But it's so interesting too because whenever I've found when I'm like driving anywhere, let's say I'm going to Melbourne or Brisbane or whatever, you can just feel your eyes. And
the micro sleeps.
Correct.
Really
and you just
dangerous.
know how dangerous they are. And what I found is that if you don't have that 2 hour break, and they are right about the 2 hours, every 2 hours you should just stop, get out of the car, walk around the car, whatever. They are right. There's something. What science? I've got to ask you, what is that? What is the science behind that? Do they just know at that 2 hour mark, or is it have something to do with driving? Like, is it more the driving, the monotony of the driving, or what? Like, what's
it's a combination.
What's the science
it's a combination because you've got this build-up of sleepiness that's going on.
Okay.
And the only way that you can get rid of that is to rest, to have a sort of a short sleep or rest of some sort.
Yeah, I see.
So there's that element of it. And if we don't do that, the brain starts to sort of take over. We get these sort of micro sleeps where sort of part of the brain momentarily switches off, basically.
Yeah.
Or sort of goes to sleep, and the repercussions of that can be,
of course,
horrendous.
That's right.
The other part is just the monotony of a drive. If you're performing any task, if it's a very monotonous, long, ongoing task. I mean, in psychology, we know all about this because if we want to tire someone out, we just give them this god awful, boring task where when something appears on a screen, they've got to just click a button. And they have to do that for ages, at indeterminate times. And, it's the worst possible task for trying to stay alert and awake.
Yeah.
So I think it's a combination of the task and the fact that you're building up this sort of sleep, this tiredness, and the only way to offset that is by having a break.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. I mean, it's so dangerous because as, like have the ads on the TV, you only you shut your eyes for a moment, you shift lanes, you just veer out of your lane into another vehicle, and it just, it doesn't take much.
It doesn't take much at all.
Now, we're on the home stretch. You've been very generous with your time. You're on your home stretch. All right, I've got 2 questions and we're going to wrap this up. What are some of the biggest academic debates and problems in relation to sleep research at the moment?
Well, there's probably a couple of things. I think it was very appealing to think about sleep as playing a really active role in our memory consolidation. So there's a real debate about, is sleep actually that critical for memory consolidation? Or is it more of a process that we're not distracted by other things while we're sleeping, and that's what makes it seemingly conducive to memory? So the more sleep-focused researchers will say, no, the things that are going on in the brain while we sleep are actually what are consolidating and storing our memories. Whereas another camp would say, I think it just happens anyway. And I don't know, I think you're overplaying the role of sleep there. And I think so the debate's still out with regards to the precise role and importance of sleep in some of our memory formation. Now, personally, I'd like to think, as a sleep researcher, I'd like to think it does have an active role, and I've done some research around that. And I must say, even from my own experience, it's a bit inconclusive.
Okay.
Yeah. Part of that is just the difficulty of exploring and researching these things.
Yes.
But I think there's more to it, and we just don't know the full answer at this stage.
Now, if anyone is listening here and they want to read about sleep, is there any kind of books that you would recommend on sleep and why? Like maybe one or two?
Aiming for the ones that are written by the people that are researching or practicing in sleep medicine or sleep psychology are the ones to aim for, because these are the people that are going to talk within the realms of, the empirical literature, within the realms of what science is telling us, because there are a lot of interesting literature out there as well around sleep, which are really just people's opinions or based on specific experiences that aren't necessarily beneficial to the wider population or practical in a lot of ways, and even sometimes detrimental or problematic.
Yeah.
So Matt Walker is a well-known academic in sleep research, and he's written a very accessible book on sleep. So Matt's book is called Why We Sleep.
Okay.
So if you're wanting to look that up.
Sure.
But, lots of books out there. But like I said, aim for the ones that are written by people that are kind of living and breathing this stuff.
Yes. Yeah. Makes sense. All right. So last question. I promise this is the last question. You've been a great guest. So just maybe tell us a little bit about your upcoming or current research projects that you have on sleep at the moment.
Sure. At the moment, we're doing a lot of research amongst school students, actually, and we're looking at sleep as one aspect of their life amongst a range of things, and we're trying to kind of model how all of these different parts of our life come together to predict certain outcomes like, mental health or engagement in school and learning and that type of thing. So sleep is an important part of that, but it doesn't exist in isolation. So we also interact with our friends, we interact with our family, we get, physical exercise, we get rest time, we engage in so many other things in our lives and in our day, and so none of these things exist in isolation, and they must somehow interact with each other to influence these outcomes. So we're interested in that, but we're also interested in sort of personal ways of thinking and feeling, So what do the children, what do the students think about life in terms of, do they have a good sense of agency around things like their sleep, and this sort of thing? And does that influence then outcomes like wellbeing, anxiety, depression, satisfaction with life, sense of hope for the world, and this kind of thing? Yeah, so we're really sort of focusing on sleep as one aspect of many things in our life, and how do they all kind of work together to produce the best life.
Yeah. Oh, it's such a fascinating topic. We've been going for a while now. We might leave it there, but we could talk for hours, I think, about sleep. It's one of those universal things that can be a bit of a mystery, I think, sometimes for a lot of us. Dare I say it, we don't want to think about it too much. Like when it's going well, we just don't want to talk about
Let's
it.
just
right?
leave
Let's
it.
just leave it. Let's not talk about it. Don't talk about it. Everything's going well. And then, of course, when you're not getting enough, or you get the cranky pants on, whether it's been too hot and you're having a couple of days without any sleep, you then start taking notice, don't you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Anyway, we'll leave it there. Dr. Mark Kohler, thanks for being on Deep Thinking with Dr. Stephen Stolz. A huge thank you to my amazing producer, Luke Watson. Your endless support, creativity, and hard work make this podcast possible. I couldn't do it without you. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. Your support means the world to me. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend. Until next time, stay curious and take care. This has been a Jazz Flute Media production.